Upheaval, Reckoning, Chapter 59, Destiny. Twi! Applejack's furious cry caught in the back of her throat and burned there along with the leftover vomit and nausea. She choked back a sob and turned her attention on the monster that made her fail to save her friend. Puddinghead's foul mouth had opened to snake-like proportions. No foul erupted from the maw this time, just a hideous gurgling sound. To Applejack it sounded as if the ghost was laughing at what had happened. The golden disc fluctuated just one more time before Applejack let the outrage spur her on. Twilight wasn't dead. There was no way that Twilight was dead. Whatever it was that swallowed her was going to suffer the worst case of indigestion it ever had in its ghostly life. Then it was going to spit Twilight back out, covered in disgusted ghost vomit, but as good as before. Not every pony seemed to have noticed what had happened. The arrival of this sixth ghost had steered the others into a frenzy. Rainbow Dash and Sable Steel had been keeping Hurricane busy with their altering attacks, but they now had to dodge desperately as the ghostly Pegasus hacked about in a berserk rage. Several sky-blue feathers flew up and floated in different directions after a particularly close swipe. Pansy. Applejack couldn't find where the other ghostly Pegasus was. What she did find was an exploding mass of spectral flesh chasing after Fluttershy, who had stopped using her powers to slow the enemy down in favor of just trying to stay out of reach. A fleshly pod, possibly a leg, twisted in the dark and looped towards Fluttershy. The mouth at its end snarled, slavered, and snapped. Pinkie Pie was galloping towards Smart Cookie, but Applejack wasn't sure what she could accomplish. "Twilight!" Rarity's cry was enough to show she had noticed. There was little she could do, however. Some of the many gems attached to Platinum had detached themselves and whirled into a storm of jagged, crystalline shards. The few openings that both Rarity and Lioncourt used to attack with their blades had disappeared. Applejack only had that short moment to take in all their problems before she had to concentrate on her own predicament. She had lost Twilight, and that meant the loss of a lot of magical support. Without any shields beyond the disc, every attack the enemies made now seemed twice as dangerous and twice as frightening. The mass of fire, for all its worrisome blaze, now seemed desperately needed. Whatever Twilight was up to now, it better be quick or they might all be dead. She glanced at the icy thing that had swallowed her friend, hoping for something, anything that might be able to help pull Twilight out. The new arrival had to be the ghost of Clover the Clever. She was the only companion that hadn't showed up. But the thing didn't even look like it was ever a pony at some point. It resembled nothing more than a huge chunk of glowing ice. A mass of tentacles sprouted from one part of it, like a stubborn plant that had taken root on a boulder. The cold that wafted from the thing chilled Applejack to the bone. The gurgling laugh from Puddinghead turned into the rumble of building gas. Applejack knew that there was no more opportunity to think things through. She had to do her part. For now, she and the rest of her friends had to survive. Once Twilight fought free, they would regroup and fight back. Rainbow Dash could only watch in horror as the tentacles sprouting from the mass of ice grabbed Twilight's sparkle. Even that moment, however, was rushed. She had to look away and concentrate on her safety. Hurricane had picked up the pace, and his wild swings and the many awkwardly positioned blades coming out of his body were making it more and more difficult to dodge, let alone find some way to attack. One blade whistled past her wings, cutting loose a few feathers. Seeing Hurricane fight even harder did little to dampen Rainbow's spirit. She had plenty more to dish out. Despite flying desperately for a while now, she was as fresh as when she started this climb, or descent. She felt something solid every time she dove in there and kicked. Even her crossbow bolts, whenever she could find enough purchase to reload and aim, were sheathed in the weird light that had enveloped her. She could see Hurricane recoil with each strike. These chipping attacks would eventually wear her enemy out. She just needed time that apparently wasn't going to be given to her. The others looked like they were beginning to tire. Nearby, Sablesteel was diving in, covering for her while she hovered there, torn between continuing this pattern or rushing in to save Twilight. Even the Thorn was breathing hard. "Sablesteel!" she called out. "I have eyes, Rainbow Dash," Sablesteel called back. "Go help your purple friend." Rainbow didn't need to be told twice. She didn't know this Thorn that much. Well, she didn't really know any of them, but they were dependable when it came to fighting. Sablesteel's blades were coated with some kind of glowing liquid that hurt even ghosts, and she was really good at dodging. Rainbow wanted to see how another Thorn was doing, but she clenched them tightly for a second and refocused. Sablesteel didn't need to destroy Hurricane. She just needed to keep him busy. "Hold on, Twilight," she thought. The ice looked immense, even from a distance. It looked big and hard, enough to take on a catapult shot head-on. Rainbow didn't have a catapult, only her hoofs and a crossbow. A sonic rainboom could probably shatter a large portion of it, if she was willing to turn into a red splatter floating in the abyss. That didn't matter right now. It certainly didn't stop Applejack from flailing at the ice with that fancy silver chain. She flapped her wings harder. If she had to beat the ice apart with her hoofs, so be it. It was a harsh, glaring white light piercing even her eyelids that finally told Twilight that she was awake. She opened her eyes and expected the worst. An icy tomb, a ring of enemies surrounding her, the gates to the eternal herd. None of those things greeted her once she could see. Twilight stood in an opulent, circular chamber, the sort meant to host a meeting or dinner for a great number of ponies. At the center was a round table of fine oak wood, trimmed with gold and surrounded by 12 chairs of the same material and construction. The surface was intricately engraved with pictures of bunches of grapes, apples, various grains. 12 sets of gold dinnerware lay ready for use. A deep blue carpet, soft enough to leave Twilight's hoofs a little tingly, covered the stone floor. Various tapestries, each depicting some setting of everyday pony life, from harvest to a city scene to some kind of magic contest, hung over the walls. The sudden transition from the fetid darkness and confusion of fighting to this opulent place left Twilight reeling and wary. This had to be a trap. She didn't see a door or windows. For all the luxury it showed, this chamber was still a prison. She cast her first spells. The place was heavily enchanted. Once she could get a feel of what spells were in effect, she could get to work. "Cease your pointless pawing at my spells, Pony. You're not going to leave this place." Twilight froze and turned around. There was a pony in the room with her now. She hadn't felt any teleportation spell or heard anything before those words. "Who are you?" Even as the words left her lips, she already knew the answer. "Clover," was the quick reply. "The clever to many, the prophet, the great, the wise, the powerful, the fair. They've accumulated over the course of my rule." Twilight did indeed recognize Clover the Clever through the light purple coat and the angry, entitled glare from Starswell's final moments. Clover was far from the hideous shade that the other companions were reduced to. She didn't look incorporeal, and no sign of decay touched her. Her straight, dark purple mane was cut short and slicked back for efficiency, in sharp contrast to the elaborate curls of platinum. Gone was the simple burlap hood and cloak. Instead she wore a majestic, woven cloak of blue with intricate, swirling patterns of silver, like watery waves, threaded through the whole piece. Clover the Clever looked like she had taken a piece of the ocean itself and turned it into a cloak and hood. Twilight expected a set of equally marvelous shoes, but Clover's legs were completely hidden by the long, sweeping cloak. As for what she said, Clover's words didn't sound like boasting. It sounded more like irritation over having to introduce herself. No outrage marred Clover's face, not like that time with Starswirl. It was all imperiousness. She talked like she was the greatest pony of all, talking to a worthless peasant. Twilight was happy to change the mood. In a way, she was glad that Clover was more lucid than the other companions. This was not an opportunity to be missed.
"What about the betrayer?" she asked. "Did that also just accumulate?"
"I have never betrayed any pony," Clover said. Some of that outrage was back now. Clover wasn't the only one feeling it either.
"You poisoned Starswirl the Bearded," Twilight shouted. "You betrayed your master."
"I punished him for his betrayal," Clover snarled.
"A teacher is supposed to elevate his student to greatness, not drag her down." "He was trying to save you,"
Twilight said, her voice lowering. It wasn't fear that cowed her. It was pointless to turn this into a shouting match. Clover waved a hoof dismissively.
"He was trying to save himself. He was trying to save his legend, to keep me from surpassing him, even if it meant hiding the way to our heritage."
She gestured around her to the many tapestries of what looked like life in the old kingdom and its riches, before turning her gaze back to Twilight.
"We have always been meant to serve the Deep Father. Starswirl tried to prevent that and died for it. Now it is your turn to serve, little pony." "What do you want from me?" Twilight asked.
She crouched low, her horn glowing for a defensive spell.
"I want your body."
Clover took a step forward.
"It's strong and warm with life. We are powerful like this but limited. We can do so much more alive."
Her horn started to glow as well. Her magic was nearly the same shade as Twilight's, but the crackling purple energy was tainted with wisps of black twisting around it like worms.
"I'm not giving you anything."
Twilight fired her first spell, a simple but powerful bolt of force. She wasn't sure yet as to what Clover the Clever was capable of, but the reaction to this attack should be telling. The bolt fizzled against the black and purple shields that materialized at the very last second. Clover looked barely annoyed by this brazen and direct attack.
"I wasn't asking," she said. "Know your place, lesser servant. You should be honored that your sacrifice will accomplish so much for the Deep Father's chosen." "I wouldn't sacrifice a bent paperclip to Oceanus,"
Twilight said. She didn't like how easily Clover dealt with her probing attack, but she was far from beaten.
"For each blasphemy you speak, I will make the transference more painful," Clover said.
The magic around her horn flared up and Twilight braced for an attack. However, just as quickly as it had brightened, the tainted light faded into nothing. Twilight raised an eyebrow, but she already had a shield up. Clover's lips twisted from tightly pressed annoyance to a confident smile before she began to speak in a loud voice.
"Oh, Deep Father, your faithful daughter implores you." "Shut up!"
Twilight was tempted to drop the shield and attack. Clover wasn't using any magic, at least not the sort of she could feel. And those words, she hated them. They reminded her of a heritage she wanted no part of. How could Clover the Clever serve a monster like Oceanus with such fervor? A quick blast of lightning should shut this ghost up. Yet the way Clover spoke also filled her with foreboding. This was not magic, but it was something.
"Here stands before me one of your wayward children. I beseech you for authority over her, so that she may know your greatness."
A strange sensation touched Twilight's horn, like a point of cold that washed down her body with an oppressive chill. That was it. Detectable magic or not, she was under attack. She aimed and cast her spell, expecting a sudden lightning bolt to the face to surprise even Clover the Clever in the middle of such a melodramatic speech. Except the spell didn't cast. Twilight glanced at her horn. The magic was still there, still ready to be cast. What had happened? Did Clover—
"Kneel, Twilight,"
Clover said. Twilight knelt. She had already completed the motion before she even realized that her body was moving on its own.
She tried to stand, to jump out of this humiliating pose, even if she had to rip her knees out. Her legs refused. They did not even tremble out of effort. It was only after her third futile attempt did she notice something else. "What did you do to me?" she asked. "And how do you know my name?" "The Deep Father knows all his children by name," Clover said softly. "It was given to me so I may command you, as a parent gives authority to the most responsible child to manage the unruly ones, so I have been given power over you." "That's ridiculous. You can't—" "Speak in a respectful tone. You can't just have power over me." Twilight ground her teeth when her voice came out calm and polite. "Daughters obey their father," Clover said. "Struggle all you want, you cannot fight the natural order of things." "What do you—" Twilight choked, the only sign that she was trying to gain some control over her voice. That she was able to speak at this point was likely because it amused Clover. "What do you want from me?" "We've been over that," Clover said. "I will trap your soul in here and make use of your body." She telekinetically willed Twilight's face close to hers. "Enjoy the last sensations of warmth, Twilight." Rarity's mage blades spun erratically above her, barely able to maintain the slow-moving circle she kept them in when they weren't flying around. She scraped off a crystallized portion of her torso with one hoof, wincing as the fresh wound stung. The increasing number of agonizing, raw, bloody patches made it clear that something terrible had happened. She didn't have to look around to guess what it was. Moments ago she had relied on occasional shielding from Twilight to deflect the worst of Platinum's crystallizing attacks whenever evasion failed her. That shielding support was gone and Platinum had gone berserk. Waves of purple energy wafted from Platinum's horn like malevolent clouds of sparkling lights. Rarity had been falling back more and more. Even with the enchantments she was still figuring out, it didn't look like she had done much damage. Each of her blades served as the core of a brilliant, translucent blade of energy. It annoyed her that she wasn't clear on the specifics of how to manage this new development in her mage blade wielding, but she was happy to use it on the fly for now. Also mildly annoying was that Lioncourt had looked at her new weapons with nothing more than a pleased smile instead of shocked disbelief. As for Lioncourt, he wasn't faring a great deal better than her. His pristine red coat, which he had been so careful to keep spotless earlier, was tattered in places. Blotches of darker red showed against the fabric. Despite his injuries, his smile did not even waver. He galloped past an advancing cloud of magic and stood next to her. "It seems we're at the end of our rope, my dear Rarity," he said. "The element of magic's bearer is dead, and we're not far behind." Rarity took a breath as deep and long as she could. The cold of the abyss found a way to seep into her lungs and crush them when Lioncourt said those. She wanted to stab him for being so flippant, but she swallowed the indignant rage. That couldn't be true. Even if Twilight's support had suddenly stopped, that was impossible. Something must simply be distracting Twilight, and the sadistic stallion was simply insisting on his mind games even during such a dangerous time. She suppressed the urge to look around for Twilight as well. She couldn't afford to look away from Platinum while keeping the other companions in her periphery. Another cloud of crystallization came at her, forcing her to gallop to the side. To her annoyance, Lioncourt kept close. "Must you do this now? You're not bothered about dying down here with us," she said. "My death is 700 years overdue, my dear Rarity," Lioncourt said. His blades flew out, somehow still finding gaps amidst all of the clouds to stab at Platinum. "I would have preferred more of a spectacle and several more pints of blood, but this will do." Rarity reconsidered following through with her blades. Even with her enhancements, she wasn't going to bring down this ghost with more direct strikes. She needed more. They all needed more. She could hear the desperation among her friends even without looking. "Cover for me," she finally said. Lioncourt merely nodded and charged Platinum despite the clouds coming his way.
Rarity finally tore her eyes away from Platinum to search for Twilight. The enormous chunk of ice came into view. Applejack was galloping in a circle around it, dodging clouds of yellowish haze. Great gobs of vomit everywhere, splashing against the golden disk in front. Applejack answered by hurling her chain, not at Puddinghead, but at the chunk of ice.
"Twilight!"
Applejack yelled.
"I know you're still alive. Come on out, we need you."
The chain struck the ice hard like a whip, but did not even leave a crack.
"So that's where she is,"
Rarity thought. She sent all of her blades towards the ice, converging the thrust into a single point.
"Twilight!"
she shouted. She glanced to her sides. Her cry and Applejack's seemed to have caught the others' attention as well. The slurp and snap of a dozen fanged mouths coming at her left little to Fluttershy's imagination as to what would happen if she slowed down. She didn't even have enough leeway to glance back at the hideous shapes that Pansy had taken. Even fleeing for her life was a confused and difficult balancing act. She flew as hard as she could to escape Pansy, but she knew better than to fly too far from where the others were. Terrifying as being caught by these ghosts was, the thought of becoming lost in the abyss, to wander this blackness forever, was far more so. From a great distance, Rainbow Dash and Sable Steel circled the horribly maimed hurricane while Longstride shot at Smart Cookie. She had also circled in time to see Twilight being pulled into a giant chunk of ice by long, rising tentacles. Without a second thought, Fluttershy winged towards the ice. She felt a few drops of drool land on one of her legs as one of the mouths barely missed its bite. Clover the Clever. She knew that on instinct, felt it more within her than through any kind of deduction. That thing was Clover the Clever, the miserable instigator of all of this towering pile of shit. Fluttershy flapped her wings harder, ignoring the strain on her shoulders and her wildly beating heart. The cold wafting from the ice was nothing to the sudden boiling in her blood. Clover the Clever had swallowed her friend. The nerve of this worthless, overweening, primping little worm of a filly. She was this world's version of Soulless Coruscaria, a clingy nag prostrating herself before Oceanus, leading a cult of slimy, self-absorbed ponies pretending to serve, when all they truly wanted was to gorge themselves on his power. They were all the same. Soulless Coruscaria, Lunalux Umbra, Abyssus Batitor, the Six Companions, sycophants, slaves, parasites, the lot of them. She was going to take a lot of pleasure breaking Clover the Clever and showing her what it really meant to wield the power of Oceanus. Fluttershy's wings slowed and her eyes widened. The sudden stream of angry, even cruel thoughts felt so natural that she barely even noticed that something strange was going on. Why were these names so familiar? Why did it matter how they served Oceanus? A hiss followed by a spit from behind signaled that Pansy was catching up again. Fluttershy flapped her wings harder, wincing as the burn in her muscles worsened. Slowing down had been a bad idea. It wasn't just Pansy catching up to her, fatigue was as well. She shut her eyes for a moment.
"Please,"
she whispered mentally.
I need more than just slowing them down with a stare. Look, Horace, other Fluttershy, or whatever you are, please."
Again there was no response. Again the prospect that she was that other Fluttershy came to mind. In that case she didn't need to beg some other pony. Or thing. She could do it herself. The outrage still simmered within. She needed to put these pretenders in their place. She had stood ready to serve the very moment Prince Oceanus was born. She had never needed to be impressed by his prowess, or his position as firstborn and most likely heir. And when the moment came, she cut the tie in hopes of saving some still redeemable fragment of him. When the power of Abyss finally consumed him, Oceanus may be reborn somehow. Fluttershy shook her head. The ice was coming even closer. Applejack, Rarity, and Rainbow Dash were attacking it, leaving the Swans to deal with the other ghosts.
"That's not me,"
she wanted to protest.
I've never met Oceanus or these other ponies. I've never served him. I don't— Fluttershy!"
It was Octavia who had called out. She had stopped playing that disruptive, slow piece and turned towards Pansy's direction. Her bow moved rapidly in short, sharp motions. Instead of a pleasant or ominous melody, a clash of dissonant notes rippled through the air. Something struck Pansy from Octavia's direction, shoving the ghost back as if she had been struck by several boulders. The attack didn't do much harm, but it allowed Fluttershy to put some distance between her and Pansy again. A second wave of painful, clashing notes rippled through the air as Octavia pushed Pansy farther back. The ice was barely more than a stone's throw away now. Fluttershy looked at it and recognized the power of Abyss, the sickened version of Oceanus's power of water. The others were making little headway against destroying the stuff. They may as well be attacking an iceberg with salad forks. She had to do her part, but what could she do? The Eye of Fear was useless against unfeeling ice.
Slipshod, half-assed patchwork assembly of Oceanus's second hoof leftovers.
The outrage grew as she understood. There was more to what was left of Loch Horrors than just the Eye of Fear. She had but to reach in. The ice loomed closer, but something else loomed from within. She had unleashed some dark thing in herself. The results of tampering with the power of Oceanus surrounded her. Was she going to risk doing even more than what she had already done? In the end, would she joining these ghosts?
It wouldn't matter one bit if you're the remains or whatever of this Loch Horrors. You are our friend, and you've chosen to deal with this stranger aspect of you for all our sake. That is well and good enough.
Fluttershy closed her eyes and searched within. She had chosen to do this. For her friends, she would take in even this darker aspect of her. No longer did she try to hold back the memories or thoughts. Loch Horrors' power was still tainted with the power of Abyss, but he endured pain, madness, and even being broken down further to do what many had given up on, to hold on to a tiny fragment of the power of water until it could be purified. Though this aspect of her was cruel and dangerous, this act of kindness she admired. For her friends and for that goal, she would take in the last remnants of Loch Horrors. A rising sense of power filled her. As she came close enough to touch the ice, she exhaled. A stream of vapor exploded from Fluttershy's mouth, striking the ice forcefully and causing several cracks to form.
"Twilight!"
she shouted as loud as she could. It surprised even Pinkie Pie when she left the protection of Applejack's shield to go after Smart Cookie. She didn't have much to throw at this pony-shaped machine. Or was it machine-shaped pony? She wasn't going to spend this fight hiding behind a magic shield, whether it was Twilight's or Applejack's. She had avoided looking at the ley lines earlier out of fear, but she now looked as hard as she could for ley energy to use. Ley energies were weak here, which was weird given that they were very deep underground. They should be surrounded by the stuff. A loud metallic grind signaled another attack from Smart Cookie. A pair of spectral circular saws flew at Pinkie from two different directions. She hopped over one, landed upside down on the abyss above her, and then ducked the second. She thought about just kicking Smart Cookie like what Dash was doing to Hurricane, but she'd probably just lose a limb or two without hurting this ghost.
"What can I do?"
She was perpetually asking that question. Just as she thought she found some means to fight back, she was back to square one. The heavy helplessness she felt when Sablesteel hurt her wasn't there. Not this time. She remembered Rainbow Dash gently pushing her on when she had collapsed on their way here. Her friends believed that she had to be here. She believed so too. It was just a matter of finding out. She took a moment to look around. Something odd was going on. There was a giant chunk of ice that was likely the six of the companions. Applejack was whipping the thing with her chain while keeping Puddinghead back with her shield. Rarity was stabbing at it, Rainbow was smacking it with her hoofs,
and it looked like Fluttershy was spitting on it. The whiz of arrows flying and the soft thunks of their tips punching through ghostly metal punctuated the noise of battle. With the others busy with the other companions, Pinky had only Longstride for help. His shots were unerringly accurate. Nearly every joint and opening on Smart Cookie had, at least, one shaft sticking out of it. But they barely slowed Smart Cookie, and Pinky knew that Longstride did not have an unlimited supply of arrows.
Think, Pinky, she's a machine. Maybe there's a button you can push to make her blow up.
A trio of darts flew towards Pinky, followed by 2 more saw blades. Without slowing down, she leaped, spun, and cartwheeled past the deadly projectiles. Even without her twitchy tail or any other aspect of Pinky's sense, it was getting easier and easier to pick out where these attacks were going. She ducked under the swings of Smart Cookie's massive forelegs and glanced up as she ran. All she saw were more blades and darts coming after her.
Okay, maybe not a smart idea. Come to think of it, why would any pony bother making a button that would blow themselves up?
Pinkie Pie, if you have nothing to attack it with, move out of its range.
Longstride called out.
Hold on!
Pinky yelled back. She tilted her head, letting a dart fly through her mane.
I think I can find something here.
For a moment, Longstride merely stared in surprise. The moment passed and he was readying another arrow, and it was back to square one. Maybe it wasn't the machine bits Pinky had to focus on. Underneath all that gadgetry, Smart Cookie was still the ghost of a ruthless Earth Pony clan leader. Maybe there was... The multicolored energies coursing through underneath all the metal plating were suddenly visible. Pinky hadn't noticed it before because she was worried about all the spikes and blades. 2 more blades whizzed past her. Wait, did she dodge them or did Smart Cookie just outright miss? She didn't have the time to fixate on that, however. She couldn't lose this train of thought. Coppermane had talked about the gift of channeling and how it was found in Earth ponies. Though the lore of spotting it, bringing it out and developing it was a secret among the true Earth ponies, the actual gift for it could be found in any Earth pony. There could be potential channelers among the chosen right now, dismissing their odd moments of channeling as silly little quirks. Pinky shook her head. Anyway, Rock Maven was the strongest channeler ever, so... More blades flew at Pinky. She was really getting bothered now. She swung a hoof and struck one blade, sending it spinning back to Smart Cookie. A spark of ley energy flew from where the blow had struck.
Huh?
She thought. What did she just do? She stared in amazement as the blade she deflected struck Smart Cookie soundly, opening up a rip across the machine pony's flank. Wait, that was something too. Smart Cookie hurt Smart Cookie, so if they could... A thunderous roar blew out the last of Pinky's train of thought.
Get off me! Get your stinking, slimy souls off me!
That didn't sound like a ghost. That sounded like Prince Terrado in his baddest mood yet. From where the shout had come from, a multitude of red points of light flew in different directions, with one heading for her. A rush of heat blew past her and towards where the ice was.
Oh no!
It didn't have to take any Pinky sense to know that something terrible was about to happen. Her friends were all in the path of that blast of heat. She galloped towards them at once.
Longstride, keep Smart Cookie busy for me!
She shouted without looking back. Every strand of hair on her body was rising.
Girls, watch out!
She yelled. Terrado's shout had also given them pause.
Scatter!
The others did as they were warned. Pinkie Pie jumped to one side at the last moment. A great blast of heat flew past her. So intense was its passage that she cried out in pain. She looked at what had flown past and gaped. An enormous pointed shard of stone, the size of a pillar fit for the royal palace and covered in glowing red cracks, struck the ice. The point penetrated deeply, sinking the shard almost halfway through. While the others stared, Pinky was already standing next to them. She could see the thousands of cracks that pulsed with red light. The heat was almost unbearable. They had to back away to make sure that their faces weren't scorched. The frightening premonition was not gone.
Watch out!
Pinkie Pie shouted again.
Applejack stood in front of the group protectively. The massive chart exploded with a fiery, blinding blast and a deafening boom. Pinky ducked, covered her face, and screamed. The explosion was so loud that she didn't even hear herself. To her surprise and relief, she didn't even feel any heat from that explosion.
"What in tarnation was that?"
Applejack mouthed. With the blast still ringing, it was impossible to hear her. The explosion had knocked the ghosts dozens of feet away. More importantly, an enormous hole had been gouged into the ice. Pinky didn't know why every pony was bent on breaking through this ice, but she quickly jumped in to attack it with her hooves.
"Come on, every pony!" she yelled. "Just a little more!"
The others swiftly followed. The numbing cold washing over her body made even consciousness a struggle for Twilight. Her body wouldn't do anything she wanted it to. There was no freezing draft or magical science. It was as if all the warmth within her was leaking away.
"So much vitality,"
Clover said.
"Wasted on a lowly, disobedient daughter." "Why?"
Twilight's lips felt as if they were covered with a layer of frost. Still, that she could even speak meant that Clover enjoyed giving this small freedom. Clover must be expecting her to beg for mercy at some point.
"Why do you insist on serving Oceanus?"
"Because I'm meant to. We are meant to. Has any pony ever planted an acorn and grown an elm, Twilight? The order of all things guides me. It is our destiny to take the Deep Father's power upon ourselves. Who do you serve? Luxarius the Invader and his ilk? Envious filths unable to bear that our father created such creatures of potential? Which one of us is on the wrong path, I wonder?"
"Look at where you are,"
Twilight shouted as loud as she could, but her voice still came out polite.
"You're trapped in the edge of the abyss. You are not anywhere near Oceanus, certainly not by his right side. Your destiny is a horrible fate your delusions of grandeur have brought down upon you."
The confident smile finally slipped from Clover the Clever's face. The same sort of slip that showed during the final moments of Starswill the Bearded's life. "You sound like my old master," she said softly. Her voice rose when she spoke again.
"Your prattle sounds exactly like that bell-bearing clown's." "Don't you insult him,"
Twilight said.
"Then tell me, Twilight,"
Clover said, her grin back, although a little forced.
"Tell me why he died a broken old stallion while I went on to achieve greatness. Tell me why you're the one kneeling before me."
Twilight wanted to put this mare in her place for her disrespect, her delusions, and, most of all, the monstrosity of what she had brought down on her fellow ponies. If only she could move. If only she could stop herself from acting like some subservient little filly. Why couldn't she fight back? All this magical potential every pony else seemed to see in her, all the training and fights she had gone through. Why couldn't they amount to anything against Clover's strange power? Was this truly the might of Oceanus? Was this unstoppable, unmatched force the fruit of giving yourself to ponykind's so-called father? The thought of it choked out her anger.
"What's the matter, Twilight?"
Clover asked.
"No answer? Am I going to drink the last of your warmth with you silent?"
It was more than just the cold that numbed Twilight's body. More than just this mysterious power that kept her motionless. For one more time she summoned every ounce of magic she could to break free of this inaction that Clover forced on her. She was supposed to be the bearer of the element of magic. The others had shown some incredible power harnessed from within them. Applejack's shield, Rarity's enormous blades, even Rainbow Dash's strange resilience and nay immunity to the burgeoning effects of the abyss. If she ever needed such a thing, now was the time. She strained internally, unable to clench her jaw or shut her eyes tight. She willed her magic to come forth, to break loose in a raw magical blast. Anything would do. Anything.
Nothing happened. Drained and helpless, Twilight didn't bother saying anything else. "I know that silence well," Clover said. "Your loss was inevitable, Twilight. I stand in the full favor of our Deep Father, while you are all alone." Just as Twilight's vision started to dim for what she knew was the final time, a powerful jolt sent both her and Clover sliding to one side. A wave of searing heat struck Twilight like a fireball blast. She could almost feel her fury ignite. She cried out, but even that cry was moderate and respectful. Tears sprang to her eyes, but the look of surprise on Clover's face was one to savor. She wished she could see what had struck this room, but even turning her neck was impossible. The cold within her was still there, but this sudden heat fought it back just a little at the cost of severe burns. "Wretches," Clover whispered. "Even the simplest tasks and you—" She turned her attention back to Twilight. "It's such a trial sometimes leading these folds." Her lips twisted into a smirk. 6 companions, they called us. Ponies actually thought we were equal."
"Twilight!"
Applejack's voice, despite how faint it was, made something lurch within Twilight. Her friends were nearby. She wanted to shout back, to tell them that she was fine. No, to tell them that she needed help. Clover was crushing her with the power of Oceanus, and she couldn't fight back. "Twilight?" That was Rarity. It wasn't just their voices. There was a persistent clink coming from somewhere. The clink of metal striking something hard and brittle. Ice. The clinks grew louder with each strike. The look of annoyance on Clover's face turned to concern. Though her lips remained unmoving, Twilight was already smiling within at the sight of this. Her friends were close, and Clover was no longer so smugly assured of victory. "Twilight!" Other voices joined in on the chorus. Rainbow Dash, Pinkie Pie, Fluttershy. All of them were going to break her out of this place. The worry on Clover's face continued to grow. It was enough for Twilight to try again. "You're wrong," she said. She didn't mind anymore that she was speaking softly. "You're not standing in Oceanus's full favor, and I'm not alone." The rise in her voice fed the tiniest cinder of hope left. Clover's power wasn't unstoppable. The cold lessened with her efforts. She wasn't going to let this ghost suck out her life just yet. "Blasphemous wretch!" Clover hissed. "How dare you challenge me?" "I can," Twilight said. There was more than just a small bit of her strength left within that helped her. A soothing warmth came from the same direction as that fierce heat, washing over her like a soothing balm, and making her forget the burns on her hide. A pale wisp of light, gold like the disc Applejack could summon, seeped into the room. Other colors followed through a small, leaking crack across the room. Pink, white, green, light blue. The light touched her, and she grew strong from it. "You paint a pretty picture of yourself, Clover the Clever, but I see what you really are. You are not the greatest of Oceanus's daughters. You are a ghost stuck between this world and the next, waiting for Oceanus to maybe notice you when he comes by here to get his weapon." Twilight's voice rose even louder. There was a tremble of exertion in her legs now.
"The Deep Father cares nothing for us. We are as mosquitoes to him, trying to nourish ourselves with his blood only to find it full of poison. He does not gift pests."
Twilight stood up. The warmth upon her coalesced with the warmth within her, banishing the Clover's cold. "Your amazing authority is nothing more than fumes that you sucked from whatever Oceanus left behind. Don't you get it? Your house of cards' everlasting kingdom rose and fell while Oceanus slept through it all. What are leftovers compared to this?" She raised her horn, and the magic surged forth. Not just her magic, the magic she shared with her friends. Bright purple arcs exploded from her, surging across the room, running through the floor and all the fancy decorations.
A cry of rage escaped from Clover, who had raised a shield to defend herself from the falling debris and the blasts of purple magic. Twilight's voice lowered, not out of any influence of Clover, but out of her own volition.
"You're the one who's all alone. No wonder you're trapped in a tomb of ice. That's what happens when you cut yourself off from others. You can't even get help from your companions." "I'll show you the kind of help I can summon," Clover snarled. The folds of her cloak ruffled and stirred beneath her. To Twilight's disgust, it wasn't legs that appeared beneath that cloak, but more vile tentacles. She wasn't even surprised anymore, nor was she scared. "That's nothing,"
Twilight listened to her friends called out. The clinking grew louder and louder, the warmth grew stronger and more comforting. A massive crack of melted ice allowed a myriad of colors to shine forth. She reached out to them, turning their support into strength before staring down Clover's crouching form. The tentacles slithered towards her menacingly, but recoiled when they got too close.
"I'm never alone," she said. "When you've cut off ties, I've created mine. This is the end of your delusions, Clover the Clever."
Twilight reared up and raised her horn even higher, sending bright rays of light everywhere. She could hear more ice cracking and Clover's desperate shout. In the next instant, all the fine furnishings, even the walls, floors and ceilings, simply winked out. Twilight gasped at the sudden transition and looked down on where she was. She was surrounded by blackness of the abyss again. Around her were enormous chunks of shattered ice.
"Twilight, you're safe!"
Pinkie cried out. A smile wide across her face, Twilight looked towards the ones that had helped her. She had expected smiles as well. To her surprise, they were all staring in awe. She looked at her hoof and found herself still enveloped in the same colors.
"Wretch!"
Where there was once a regal and powerful unicorn ghost, there was now a hideous, slimy monstrosity like a snail dragged out of its shell and mixed with a squid. Bits of frost still clung to its glistening dark purple skin. It took a moment to find its head, which was the only thing that resembled a pony.
"So this is all you've attained,"
Twilight said softly.
"After all those sacrifices you made, all the research you've done. On your own, this is all you got." "I spent my life following our destiny," Clover said. "I threw away everything to follow this one goal. Be smug for now, Twilight. How long, I wonder, before this path you've chosen crumbles and sends you plunging into the same abyss?" "Even if I fall," Twilight said, "it's not to the abyss, not when I have so many ready to catch me."
Clover, or what was left of Clover, looked as if it was trying to attack, but all it did was flop forward. Its tentacles writhed and squirmed, but did nothing more than try to look menacing. Twilight didn't know if she could even bother to attack. What kind of damage could be inflicted that could be worse than what Clover had done to herself anyway?
"It's over," she said. "Call off the other companions and let us through." "Through to where?" Clover asked. "There's nothing beyond this abyss, Twilight. Nothing but the deep Father's silence. Nothing but the closed doors to his true power. Until the time of his return comes, all who come here have come for nothing." "Black Rose," Twilight whispered. Had she known? Did Black Rose lead them all here knowing that it would be a dead end? Or was she so confident in her power and skill that she expected to succeed where every other pony had failed? A hissing, burbling sound from Clover cut the musing short. She looked up in time to see Clover's slimy bulk flying at her. On instinct she cast a spell, any spell that would repel this lunge. The lights around her flashed. With a powerful groan, Clover fell back with a dull splotch. "Curse you!" Clover said, her voice becoming more faint by the word. "You've won nothing, heretic. Lexarius the Invader turned you from your destiny, and you will suffer when the time comes." Twilight didn't bother replying. At the end of that last bit of defiance, Clover the Clever's wretched form broke apart and dispersed. It was doubtful that the ghost had died, given that it was dead to begin with.
Clover had simply dispersed into a powerless, scattered mass, still waiting her deep father, who was likely just going to step over her on his way to the foul weapon.
"That's one down,"
Twilight said. She looked around again. The others had shifted their focus from her to the other ghosts, still rampaging around. True to their lack of harmony, the remaining companions didn't even seem bothered that one of them had been defeated. The Thorns looked even more banged up than before. Twilight had no idea what had happened, but seeing that all of her friends had ganged up on Clover's prison to help her, the rest of the companions had to be distracted. It was Applejack who managed to gallop towards her while the others returned to fighting the companions with the Thorns.
"Glad you're back, partner,"
Applejack said.
"We were taking a beating without you. I hope you still got plenty to throw."
"Oh, I've got plenty."
Twilight squinted and winced, suddenly aware of a sweltering wave of heat coming at her from one side.
"What is that heat?"
"Dunno,"
Applejack said.
"I think it's Prince Torado. He was bellowing earlier and threw that giant burning rock at the eyes. The crack it made was how we got you out."
So Prince Torado was nearby. There was little time to ponder that. Puddinghead's oppressive stink was getting worse. True enough, the corpulent ghost was floating their way, her mouth already open to suck the two of them in.
"Stubborn stinkhole,"
Applejack muttered. She spun her lassoed chain for another throw. Her golden disc shone brightly in front of her.
"Any ideas why? Smacking her with my chain doesn't seem to do much."
Twilight didn't answer. She had nothing in her repertoire of spells to deal with the ghosts of the 6 companions. At the end of the day, she had relied on her friends to vanquish Clover the Clever. Even now she was surrounded by the powerful energies drawn from her friends. With Applejack standing nearby, the light was reacting differently now, arcing lightly towards the earth pony as if it were trying to leap. Applejack grunted when another stream of vomit struck her shield. The hiss and bubble from the sludge made it clear as to what would happen if any of the stuff touched them. The sheer amount made it difficult for her to attack with her lasso as well. Puddinghead was floating even closer, using her own vomit for cover in order to bring more of her stench to bear. Twilight's eyes began to water again. The odor made her miss the icy tomb.
"A little help here, partner,"
Applejack said between coughs.
"She's going to fart us to death like this."
With the stink fogging up her mind, Twilight instinctively held her hoof out towards Applejack. The light sparked briefly then, with a brilliant flash, made the jump. The next few moments were difficult to discern. Something happened to the golden disc. When the light touched Applejack, it flashed and stunted forward, bashing Puddinghead and driving the ghost back. Puddinghead let out a long, horrified cry. Applejack shouted in surprise. Twilight herself let out a yelp, thinking she had just burned both herself and her friend in a reckless experiment with the odd aura around her. They soon discovered that the stench was gone and Applejack's shield was still up. As for Puddinghead, the ghost was trembling and frozen. Large chunks of her had been seared away, including her entire lower jaw.
"Twilight, what was that?"
Applejack asked. She stared in awe, then grinned.
"And can we do it again?"
Twilight looked to her still shining hoof.
"We will,"
she said. She looked towards her other friends.
"Time to finish this."
Okay, everypony, you know, there's not much I have to say about this chapter, and I think all of you can agree when I say that the encounter between Twilight and Clover the Clever kinda reminded me of the encounter with Twilight Sparkle and Nightmare Moon. I mean, we have that every one of them has some kind of, I don't know, strength, like Rarity and her Mage Blades, and Rainbow Dash with that strange light glowing around her, and only Twilight feels like she has nothing, like there's nothing. And even when they arrived earlier and the Thorns inspected her, Lion-Cord said that every element had gotten stronger except, well, the element of magic. He didn't outright say that, but he said that not all of them had gotten strong, and then looks at Twilight. So, go figure. And that encounter here, especially the end when they defeated Clover the Clever and now gave Puddinghead a good beating, remembered me of that fight with Nightmare Moon. Because at first Twilight was unable to activate the elements of harmony. And then there was that little tidbit when the other 5 of the main 6 came to her, and she said, when the spark ignites, the 6th element will reveal itself, or something like that. Don't know what the exact wording was right now, but it went something like that. And then she said that the sparks that everyone carries within them, and the spark ignited within her when she realized that she cared about them, when she heard them, and she realized that they all were her friends. Yeah, that kind of reminded me of that, because in that moment, here in this chapter, Twilight had such a moment again, and it defeated Clover the Clever in the end. In my opinion, she is not just only the element of magic, but also the sparks that ignite the elements, which kinda reminds me of something the Queen said in Upheaval Breaking Point, and later Terrado said it to Celestia, and that is Harmonia Intis. Harmony comes from within. Okay, I'd like to know your opinions on that, and sincerely yours, Visual Pony, looking forward to the next chapter, and don't forget, go Twilight!